everyone, and welcome to what I guess we could call the midnight sessions of Superhero Pantheon. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. My co-host is, as always, at Brian DeBrain on Twitter. And we are continuing our discussion of the mid-1990s Fox Kids Spider-Man series. We have just 2 episodes left of this side project, and boy, oh boy, Brian, this season's been rough, and I have to say that the thing that makes it so rough is the big revelation in episode 8, where we find out that Mary Jane is a clone, and I have to say, like, that was weird enough, but the way that Secret Wars was executed, it felt like this, because you remember how kid shows always had like the big 5-parters, like the Power Rangers had like the Green Ranger, you had the Phoenix Saga. You remember those 5-parters, right?
Of course I do. Watched them all.
This felt like a 5-parter that ended up being 3 parts.
Yeah, that's the feeling I get too. I don't know if it was because they had to like force in the Spider-Verse ending thing at the end, the last 2 episodes where it's multiple Spider-Men from different universes or what, but I don't know. I feel like there was some stuff missing, but they kind of ran out of time, and it felt like they threw a lot of, I mean, literally they had like a chessboard, literally, for Secret Wars, and they were throwing all these pieces together, and all of a sudden Lizard is turning back and forth. It just felt like it was rushed to a T, and then we kind of skipped some stuff. Like, I felt like we skipped the Fantastic Four section, but because Spider-Man was not part of the mission, they kind of just skipped over that. It just seemed like everything had to have Spider-Man centralized as the main, focus. Everything side missions, all that kind of stuff, like when Storm has to go negotiate with the alien race, that's kind of skipped over. I only think it's because they wanted to focus on Spider-Man. But if you had this in the MCU, obviously, when it's coming up in a couple of years with Secret Wars, they're definitely going to go through the Two Towers route and go through the different storylines with the different superheroes. But because Spider-Man is the captain of the team, he's the focus, so mostly every scene does have Spider-Man in it. So it's kind of a give and take. I love the concept of the Secret Wars, obviously. I love what you called in the DM a War Games type situation, which it totally is. But unfortunately, we just don't see everything, and then some things are kind of assumed, and I wish they kind of showed us Doctor Doom, like, actually curing the thing, because that's a big moment for Ben Grimm's life that he's going to forget, but we kind of brushed over it, you know what I mean? So it's kind of unfortunate, but overall, I do think the season kind of did turn around a little bit, even though the ridiculousness of the cloning, but you got to admit, I mean, when fucking Mary Jane just evaporates in his arms, you can't help but cry. I was crying.
It's definitely an emotional moment, but I think what makes the moment work is the voice work of the actors. I think the issue is that the explanation and everything associated with the storyline is complete nonsense. And I think that is, of course, where we're going to start, because the first 2 episodes, we do get the return of Hydro Man. That is episode 7, part 1. You mentioned the dream. That's how it begins. We start with a dream. Mary Jane dreaming. She's drowning. She's being scared by a clown. And eventually they're going to break down the dream and what it means. But I have to say that I was definitely getting the vibes of the movie / book. It's in combination with Nightmare on Elm Street. That's what came to mind. And given this show and the way that it clearly, these writers have a reverence for the horror genre, I could not help but make that connection.
I did think Nightmare on Elm Street, but because, I'm such a cinephile and I'm like one of the biggest Alfred Hitchcock marks that I know of, I've seen a movie with Gregory Peck back in the day. It's called Spellbound. And it's almost the same kind of concept where the audience, and he doesn't even know if he killed this person or not. And he's at a psychiatric ward, and they have to analyze his dreams in order to figure out what he's trying to remember, because he has amnesia. But they analyze the dream, and they actually show you, like, the dream itself. Like, Hitchcock filmed the dream on multiple sets, and it looks so crazy looking and avant-garde, what a dream sequence should feel like. So when I saw this, I was like, oh shit, they're doing Spellbound, because they got to do the exact same thing. Like, Mary Jane can't remember anything, but she's got these weird images in her head from the dream, and you got to put the pieces together and follow her journey in order to figure out what happened to her. And that's kind of what happened in Spellbound as well. So I kind of found that connection. Also, a lot of this part, or a lot of this story, kind of reminds me of the Bride of Frankenstein, because Hydro Man is obsessed with Mary Jane, and we find out that Hydro Man himself is a clone. It's not the original Hydro Man from the first season anyway, but it's just this obsession with having Mary Jane with him as his wife or whatever, lover. And that's totally like the Frankenstein monster in Bride of Frankenstein. He goes to the creator, I want you to create a woman for me, a bride. And that's essentially the second half of Bride of Frankenstein. So again, you mentioned this love and reverence for horror movies. I clearly saw it there, like with Bride of Frankenstein. But I think the Spellbound thing kind of goes under the radar because it's not even like it's kind of like an underrated Hitchcock classic. It's not even like in the top echelon. So I'm not surprised they took those elements, but as soon as I saw that, I was like, that's Spellbound with Gregory Peck.
I think for me, other than the dream sequence, the issue with part one is that not really a lot happens, and it's Hydro Man screaming about wanting to be with Mary Jane, mentioning multiple times that she was made for him, which of course is going to pay off in the next part. But Felicia comes back randomly and wants to help Peter. I think that this is where the writing is really suffering, because we get Felicia returning and becoming the Black Cat, and of course she has great chemistry with Spider-Man. So it's not that I don't want to see her, but it's one of those situations where they have her return, and there's like not a good explanation is provided as to why she abandoned Blade and Morbius. But then when we get into another episode, a couple episodes later, she's right back in Europe with Blade and Morbius, and it feels very haphazard, and I think that's really unfortunate, because Felicia was such an interesting character at the beginning of season 4, and what they were able to do with the Black Cat, like, I really, really liked that character and her evolution. And in some ways, like, she is significantly more interesting than Mary Jane as a character, because she is allowed to develop, because she's also the superhero. The influx of female writing obviously helped. But in this case, it felt really strange to just have her around again. And I will say, what is interesting is that you have Spider-Man kind of on the case again, kind of having to use those Batman-like detective skills, and we end up in a situation where he eventually does find Hydro Man and Mary Jane on an oil tanker, and that leads to a pretty significant battle. And yeah, any thoughts on kind of this middle section, or thoughts on Felicia's return?
It felt like we got closure with that character when she kind of went away with Morbius off to Europe with Blade, and her coming back. It was shocking, because I didn't remember this part at all. Like, I kind of remembered her in Secret Wars, but I didn't remember her being a part of this part of the storyline. It felt like kind of forced a little bit, but on the other hand, I mean, I love me some Felicia Hardy, man. She's like probably the number 2 character, my number 2 favorite character in the animated show. Number 1, Spider-Man, obviously. But like you said, that character evolution that she went through was fantastic. There's more payoffs to that in the Secret Wars stuff, I'll admit, because she does meet Captain America, and there's that connection there. But here, it had like nothing to do with it. It just felt like they needed like him, like a helper, like a partner to help him find Mary Jane. But then it just ends up being like the same thing. Like it repeats, like where Mary Jane gets kidnapped, she goes in the water, Spider-Man finds her in the oil tanker. Mary Jane gets kidnapped again, goes into the water, and Spider-Man has to follow her in the water. So it just kind of repeated, because they felt like they kind of ran out of like storytelling elements, and they were just trying to get to the reveal part. But it is what it is, and she was just kind of there. And unfortunately, you could have just taken Black Cat out, and it would have been the same. But I think what have helped was, or what have been better, I think, if she was in the room when Mary Jane like evaporates in the next episode. Even though she wasn't, but I felt like if she was there for Spider-Man, I think Spider-Man wouldn't have freaked out as much. I think she would have been there to comfort him. But I don't know. It's kind of either way you could have done it. it would have been great and effective. But either way, like if you have Felicia Hardy there, maybe make her like that crying shoulder, maybe. But she didn't really do that, so I don't know.
Yeah, I just think it was strange to have her around when it feels like they specifically took her away to kind of give them some closure. So it was a very strange. This has been a very strange season, and it has felt like it's lacked in a lot of cohesion. And in some ways, I feel the same about the X-Men's final season. It felt uh, similar, but it feels like they're trying to tell stories here, whereas with X-Men, it literally was just, okay, we're gonna do a fairy tale, and then we're gonna go to Asteroid M, and they just it seems like they were just kind of going over the place. Here, they're trying to somewhat tell a story here, but it just doesn't work out, and we get Mary Jane trying to science her way out of the situation as he is trying to escape the clutches of Hydro Man again after being kidnapped. And the smoke is seen by Black Cat and Spider-Man, so we end with a battle. But it is revealed at the end of part 1 that Mary Jane has hydro powers and is able to blast him away. Brian, this raises so many questions because, of course, Mary Jane and Peter Parker are married. So presumably this relationship has been consummated. Just the question on my mind, Brian, is how are we just identifying this issue now?
Well, from what I understand in the dialogue, something about the fact that once they're conscious that they're clones, it's like their DNA starts to break down as a response to it. If that's kind of how I read it, and in the dialogue from the Doctor, from Mary Jane. Even Mary Jane says like the more she kind of starts digging, it feels like it's gonna destroy her, and that she literally says that. So I don't know. It's very confusing because like when the clone came back, she obviously didn't think she was her clone. She thought she was the real deal. So I guess her body was stable, and then once she started figuring out like, oh no, I'm a clone, like her body starts destabilizing. So that's kind of the vibe I got. But I get what you're saying. Let's hope to God she did not get pregnant or some crazy shit like that, because that would have been worse. But they didn't even bother to touch on that. But still, like the build up to this moment, the reveal, like holy shit. I think like even though this may be one of the weaker arcs and weaker seasons, this might be my favorite episode of the whole series just because of the emotion of it all at the reveal, the stuff with like following I would call like the dream path. You know what I mean? The path of the dream that leads you to the underground layer. I thought that was really well written. And then just the performance by Christopher Daniel Barnes at the end where he was screaming no. Like I felt that. Like I felt like he lost the woman he loved in his arms, man, and that's probably his best performance to date. Uh, I would think so.
He's
And
had some really
hopefully,
good moments, but my feelings on the episodes are negative. But again, the voice work done by him has just been really, really consistent. And in that moment, just feeling the pain. And it's really easy to scream no. I mean, we've seen that. I mean, it's been mocked to death a million times when Darth Vader did it in episode 3. But to me, I think what makes this so special is just the visceral reaction and the fact that you just feel that pain of losing her. And it's like not only did he lose, he lost her, but like there's no closure because it was a clone. It wasn't actually Mary Jane. So it's a really bizarre thing that they're choosing to do here toward the end of season 5, and part 2 is really just them exploring kind of what's going on. And I love, I don't love, but again, it's just bizarre to me that Black Cat just pieces out right at the beginning of episode 8, and like this also feels like, well, this is the last time we're going to see her, but nope. As it turns out, she is going to play a role in the Secret Wars. We get continued exploration of the dream. Mary Jane gets captured again, and yeah, we do find out that Mary Jane is a clone, and just how bizarre it is, and kind of, I think it'd be one thing if there was a season long arc where like they were like in some ways planting the seeds for this, then I would have much less of a problem with it. but I don't think there were any hints that she was a clone, or there weren't any significant teases. Or I think that if they had teased this out and then there was this payoff, I think it would have worked out better. I think the other issue for me consistently for the entire run has been this show has never engaged with Mary Jane as a character. She is only a love interest. That is all she has ever been. And it sucks because I think if they had made her a character, I think this moment actually hits even harder. I think if they had teased this out and they had like clearly laid out that something was wrong with Mary Jane or something was up, like I think this could have worked out really well. And the other thing is that because there are 5 episodes left and they're not going to pay this off. I think that's the biggest sin, is that they are not going to pay off what actually happens to Mary Jane. I think that is why I come down so hard on this, because there's all these different things that you could have done to make that moment mean all the more. I think the moment is good because of the voice performances, but the problem is that nothing else works because everything surrounding it, the groundwork hasn't been laid.
I kind of wonder if they thought of this in the spur of the moment, like, oh my God, what if she's not the real Mary Jane and she's a clone? And maybe that's why, maybe it was like a sudden, story idea. Because clearly there was no not Easter eggs, but there was no, clues. There was no teases for it. It was just out of nowhere. So it makes me think they thought of it on the spot and they were like, oh shit, what if we turned her into a clone? Because then the sort of payoff is, and we'll get to this at the end of next week, is that as a reward for Spider-Man's work with Madam Web and being that hero to the, for the Secret Wars and everything, she says at the end, like, let's go get Mary Jane. So she knows where Mary Jane is. The thing is like, I think what happened was, I don't know if you know this, Jerome, but like there was supposed to be a sequel series that was supposed to be in continuity with this. And I forgot, I think it's Spectacular Spider-Man, but they ended up just making its own show. So I think the idea was maybe that in the sequel series that they were going to follow up on that, but they never just had the chance to because they just started over and reset the show. So that's kind of my theory as to why they did that. I don't know the official reason, because this is definitely one of the biggest downers that, if I blocked this out as a kid, and when I watched this recently, I was like, holy shit, if they use this for the MCU, man, that's going to be one of the biggest tear-jerking moments of all time. But the thing is like, you can't just drop that. You have to plant the seeds. So that's kind of like where I kind of lie with it too. Like, I love the moment, and I think it's, the most emotional moment of the series, but I wish they would have teased it out. I don't know if that's just kind of like 90s style of writing compared to the modern era, where in the modern era you plant all these clues. Like, for example, me and Jerome have been watching Lord of the Rings, and in the latest episode that we just watched, they've been planting that seed since like episode 2 or 3 of, boom, Mordor. It's been there the whole time. It's Mordor. So little things like that. I think in the modern era, we're just used to those, little things. I got to go back. I got to think maybe like Twin Peaks was the first maybe to do that for a wider audience, where you plant those seeds and have big payoffs in TV shows. Because usually those TV shows back in the day, like 80s and 90s, every episode was kind of like a closed arc. You know what I mean? Each episode was its own story. Very little, to be continued. Even in like Miami Vice, each story was mostly its own. Like, I think if Miami Vice came out now, it would be more serialized and more, of one story arc. But unfortunately, the way they kind of laid this out, it feels like they just made it up on the spot.
Yeah, which is unfortunate, because I think again there is a good story to tell, and Spider-Man has certainly had other animated series, none of which have followed this continuity, because of the rights issues that exist with Spider-Man. Disney basically owns anything that isn't a theatrical movie, and Sony owns everything that is theatrically released. I just don't know if you're ever going to get a follow-up to this, whether this is going to be addressed into the Spider-Verse and we get this version of Spider-Man, which I think would be really great, but I don't know if that's going to happen. And there is going to be a Spider-Man animated series on Disney Plus, but it's very much going to be in the vein of Spider-Man as a freshman in high school and is just developing as a full-fledged superhero. So they're going in a very, very different direction with this character in the next animated series. Whereas here, Peter Parker is a grown adult. And I think that there are many interpretations of the character, and I think Brian has his preferences. I'm kind of agnostic. I think both versions of the character have worked well, and I think there have been some issues with both too. I don't know. It was a weird episode to watch. I don't like the Hydro Man character. I think that's the other problem, is that of all the people that you could have had, it's like the first 6 episodes have basically had an appearance by Scorpion, who's another bad villain, and then here we get Hydro Man. It's just like, can we please move on and do something else? And then we get Madam Web as, again, saying she knows where Mary Jane is, but that Spider-Man has to help her with something, and that is what leads us directly into the 3-part Secret Wars. And any other thoughts on the 2-parter before we head into this 3-part Secret Wars?
If anything, the ending of that episode just kind of cements the fact that Spider-Man, I don't know, we always see Spider-Man suffering, and I think that's going to be like this consistent theme with every version of Spider-Man, which it should be, because it's like the sacrifice of being a hero. But man, it's like every like movie from like, I don't know, the last 4 or 5 movies, there's been like a downer, something going on in the third act, and this kind of like follows that kind of trend with Spider-Man, where something bad really happens after something good happens. But that's just kind of the story of Spider-Man. It's like he has to go and will through it, and this is certainly one of those things. He didn't even have time to grieve, because as soon as he escaped the lab, Madam Web just snatches him up and takes him into that dimensional portal. So it sucks, man. He didn't have time to grieve. He just went into a whole nother situation. So it's got to be a really intense moment for Spider-Man at this moment.
So I think the thing about Secret Wars is we have seen it's been done in the comic books. So there's been, some of that going on. We are going to see a version of Secret Wars in theaters in a few years. So there have been many ways that this has been done, and this is very much the Saturday morning cartoon version, because we get introduced to Madam Web's master, who is the Beyonder. The Beyonder has apparently chosen a team of evildoers, so to speak, to just randomly invade this alien planet. Brian, all I could say is, in my opinion, Beyonder sending evil to this planet and having it be destroyed, that is an inherently evil act. Like, you cannot be objective and say, oh, we're going to do a battle of good and evil. You have done an objectively evil thing, because presumably there are a lot of dead aliens, and a genocide has been committed by all of these evildoers.
Yeah, that it's just like the DC version when they did Crisis on Infinite Earths, and they had the Monitor as this kind of like same role as the Beyonder, like monotone, no emotion, very, very Vulcan-like. And I kind of get it, but at the same time, it's like, dude, what an asshole! Like a total asshole. Like, I don't know. It's weird, because he's this being that's trying to conduct this test. Why is he conducting this test? There's no answer for that. And then, with this thing about picking a team or whatever, is so weird, because there's an explanation for it, but there's no reason for it. And the reason that the Beyonder is doing this is because I guess he's testing Spider-Man overall. That's the main thing that we find out at the end of this. But it just seems like they could have done something more with stakes, as opposed to like, hey, we're going to create this planet that's all good, and we're going to corrupt it, and we're going to start this war, and then we're going to wipe everyone's memory afterward after the war. So I don't know. I mean, I enjoyed the crossover element, obviously, but it's kind of weird. Also, I wanted to mention, like, usually every week we kind of have these surprise voice actors. So the voice actor for the Beyonder is Earl Bowen. Do you know who Earl Bowen is?
The voice was definitely familiar.
Last week we talked about that detective from Terminator 1. This week we got another Terminator cameo. This time the asshole doctor that tried to gaslight, the gaslighter in Terminator. So just, yeah, he's an asshole. He's good at playing an asshole. But have you seen him in other things? Earl Bowen. He's kind of half bald, but yeah, he's the asshole from Terminator. He's I can barely tell, but I kind of identified it a little bit. But I think they kind of altered his voice a little bit with a little digitizing there, because he totally sounds monotone but recognizable. So I was kind of like, this sounds familiar. Also, little note, all the crossovers that are going on, like they did get Storm, Iona Morris, the actual Storm voice from the X-Men, but I guess with some contractual issues, like not all the Fantastic Four came over, only like a couple of them. So just a little weird that they only got like half the original voice cast of the Fantastic Four, but they did get Storm. Also, you're not going to believe this, but I don't know if we mentioned before, but I forget who played Tony Stark before, but do you know who Robert Hayes is?
So the Tony Stark and Iron Man, it was a different voice this time. Is that my understanding?
I think it is, because Robert Hayes is the star of Airplane. And we would have mentioned this, I think, before, because I'm sure you're a fan of Airplane just as much as I am.
I mean, right? it's literally on my list of 100 favorite movies.
I know, that's
absolutely.
So I was just kind of like, wow, Iron Man flying in the air, Airplane. I don't know, good connection. But if they were to do like an Iron Man in the late 80s, early 90s, I could kind of picture Robert Hayes, because I mean, he had that kind of look in Airplane. You give him a mustache and like a shorter haircut, I think he can pull it off. So.
The only problem is he wouldn't be able to drink, though. That's the issue.
Oh, that's right. Oh man, I guess they perfectly cast it, because he's just kind of using the same role from Airplane. I don't know. It's just crazy the way they kind of put that together. But I do love the cast they put together. I guess what kind of shocked me, I don't know if this shocked you, Jerome, but the fact that he only picked one X-Men and he picked Storm. And I know you kind of have a problem with that a little bit because of some of the scientific technicalities, but when he picked her, I forgot about that, and I kind of like cheered him. I cheered, because I was like, if this were like a theater and like you had an audience there, all the audience is expecting you to pick Wolverine, right? Like that's like the obvious answer. But he goes with Storm, and I was like, ooh, that's a bold choice, and it's like something you would never think of.
Here's the thing. So as of this point, Hugh Jackman is going to be coming back as Wolverine for Deadpool 3. He is going to be in Secret Wars. I would be willing to bet a significant amount of money that not only is he going to be in Secret Wars, the movie, but he is going to be in the yellow spandex. I am convinced of this at this point. And the fact that he is returning in Deadpool 3 actually makes me believe this even more.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the breaking news, right? I mean, as of this recording, those 2 days of back-to-back videos of Ryan Reynolds' Cabin House announcing Deadpool 3. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you could do that because it's the multiverse. You know what I mean? Like, you can almost do anything you want now. So put Wolverine in the spandex. Put Wolverine in the 80s look where he's just got the fucking white shirt and jeans, and digitize him to make him like digitize him to make him 5'3", like the original Wolverine. And give us a version of that.
We don't need to do that. We don't need to.
How? Because I would laugh my ass off. Because I mean, look, Wolverine originally in the comics is supposed to be like 5'5", you know, short and stocky, but you know, history kind of changes.
I mean, look, Hugh Jackman has played the role so well that it almost doesn't matter. I think for me, the weird part is that the Fantastic Four are just very dysfunctional. And to me, it's like, if you're going to have like the first family of Marvel just in this, it's like Ben Grimm just immediately turns heel on his family, essentially, when he is, now of course, Dr. Doom does cure him, quote unquote, but he turns on them awfully fast. Johnny is just a complete asshole the entire time. And I get that that's like part of his gimmick, and we see that reflected in what Chris Evans did in the movies, and we've seen that on the animated show as well. But it's like Marvel has just they have not done Fantastic Four well ever, and the animated series was bad. Here it's like Invisible Girl gets almost nothing to do. Reed Richards gets a little bit more to do because he's a scientist, but it's really bizarre to me. Just nothing about this makes sense. They're able to bring Black Cat. Like, Beyonder is very clear that he can only bring a certain number of people on the team, and then he is just able to bring Black Cat. It's like, if you're able to bring Black Cat, why don't you just go back and get the rest of the X-Men? Because the X-Men obviously have a lot of experience in space. And why wouldn't you want like Wolverine and Cyclops and Gambit on this team as well? Like, I get the logic. Okay, the Fantastic Four, they battle Doom. That makes sense. Like, I totally get that. I get bringing in Storm. Storm's a very powerful mutant, but the problem with Storm is that there are multiple times where she should be using her powers and she doesn't, and that's really strange to me. Like, she does eventually do it, but like, there's this very specific point when like the evil aliens are like about to invade, and I'm like, so why isn't Storm making a flood to keep them away? It was a little weird to me, and like, they could have just scienced it away by saying, well, the atmosphere is very different on this planet compared to Earth, so Storm can't control the weather as well. Like, they could have just had a line of dialogue, like, and just explained it away, and fine, like, go ahead, like, say that okay, maybe Storm isn't as useful because it's a different atmosphere, but they didn't do that, and it was weird. The good news is that I guess the evil team, they won the coin toss, so they got to destroy the planet. Also, a rather random assortment of people. Like, okay, we have Doc Ock. That's fine. Lizard almost immediately turns babyface, and I guess that keeps in the theme with, like, Lizard isn't actually bad, but he's very, very tragic. Doctor Doom is he's the one that kind of becomes the main villain in all of this, and is eventually taking Beyonder's powers, and is the one that is kind of purporting to create this utopian society. Reed Richards has a very good line about fascism that I appreciated, but yeah, it felt very clunky, and it felt like this is something that should have been 5 parts instead of 3.
Yeah, the rules, they didn't even stick to the rules right off the bat, which I was kind of like, well, if you got the Fantastic Four, that's 4 picks already, right? So then he picked 3 more. He picked Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor. So I was like, okay, they're just throwing the rule back out the window now, because now it's like 7 on 5. And then they had Lizard turn, and then now it's out 7 on 4 because those 4 are super powerful. But did you notice who they like didn't put on the evil team that probably should have been there?
There were a number of names that came to mind. Like, Kingpin has been a huge part of this series,
Yeah,
and the
Kingpin
fact
was
that
that's the big one for me, because he's probably been the main antagonist throughout the show. So what are you telling us? He's not evil? Like, is he just a guy that's, following the money, so to speak?
apparently he is chaotic neutral, I guess. That's what that
That's what
means.
I was kind of like blown away with that. So I was like, okay, I guess that's a way to look at Kingpin, because I always thought him as like a super hyped up villain. But I guess if the Beyonder thinks he's not evil enough, then maybe he's not really a villain after all. So he did pay for his wedding. So I'm just kind of like, I guess they really turned it
See,
on
for me,
Kingpin.
I think, again, this is something that I think you could fix with like 2 lines of dialogue. Instead of saying that Beyonder picked, I think he could have just been like, I randomly generated an evil team and a good team, and this is what you have to work with. Like, I think that
Yeah.
would have been so much better, because then it would be much more plausible. Like, to me, if you say, okay, he randomly picked Lizard, Doc Ock, like, that is something like I could absolutely see that being the case, because that is a pretty random assortment of villains, and throwing Red Skull in there and whatnot, and it's like, it's like Storm is kind of a random X-Man, because the thing for me that's so weird is that Spider-Man in the X-Men crossover episode, he doesn't really interact with Storm that much. Like, the 2 X-Men that he primarily engages with are Wolverine and Beast, which maybe I don't necessarily know how useful they would be in this situation, but it's weird to me that Storm was just there and didn't use her powers as much. And yeah, it's a very strange 3-parter, and the payoff to it is I guess it's okay, but it's not as good as it could have been. I think I will be very, very curious to see what the movie version looks like, and I wasn't expecting the movie version here, but like, I remember distinctly the Dark Phoenix saga, and uh the just how good that was. Like, I remember that being 5 parts, and I remember thinking that it was really good. It was a really well told story, really well developed, and obviously it's different because there are more characters and whatnot, but I have seen these epic like Marvel comic stories come to life in a good way, and I feel like they did a really good job with the 5-part Phoenix Saga and then the 4-part Dark Phoenix Saga. I feel like they did a really good job with that, but then in this situation, I just feel like they kind of biffed it, and it's unfortunate because like you have access to all these characters and you could have done a lot. Like I know you had to be marking out really bad, seeing Red Skull and knowing that Captain America was there too. So I could definitely imagine you being super excited, but they didn't really go anywhere with that.
Yeah, the problem is it's the stakes, and I think because Secret Wars has been told twice. They told it in the 80s and they redid it in 2015. And in 2015, to my understanding, the stakes were higher because each team was like part of a different universe and they're fighting for the universe, which Dragon Ball Z Kai actually Dragon Ball Z Kai kind of did that same kind of storyline where they had multiple universes face each other in a giant tournament. And this is the same kind of concept, but here there's no stakes for fighting for your universe. It's just like we have to save this random planet and save millions of people that we've never even seen before. So I think if they kind of rewrote it where they were defending the honor and stakes of their universe, then it would have meant something. But because like, oh, we're just gonna wipe up your memory, no one's gonna remember anything. It was just kind of weird because why such have low stakes when you have all these characters together, and why wipe their memory? Like have them remember this moment. So it's just the concept is great, but the storyline aspects of it all, I think over time have been improved because 2015's version clearly had a better idea of what the stakes should be, as opposed to just a battle world where you got multiple people facing off against each other from different comic books. So I get it why they did it because you got to love a crossover, and I love Captain America interacting with Black Cat and Red Skull and everything, but I just wish the stakes were higher. And they could have done that, but it would have just complicated things more. But I think probably each person in the game or in the war probably should have had like a personal prize to attain to or something like that in order something to achieve instead of just, oh, I want to conquer this random planet because I got dropped there randomly.
So there's a couple random notes that I want to bring up. So Lizard is able to fend off the Marvel All-Stars for a couple minutes, and I thought that was completely implausible. We also have Spider-Man keeping a diary a la Captain Kirk. And he even says so that it's not a secret war, which I thought that was pretty funny. Did you any thoughts on Spider-Man's captain's logs?
It's fine, but I think they're gonna forget about it. I think because like once it's end, he just goes straight to the
Beyonder is going to wipe the tapes.
Yeah, like it's not gonna matter because I think even himself he's gonna forget that he wrote the diary because after this he goes straight to another universe or something like that, and then after that he goes with Madam Web to go find Mary Jane. So where does he keep the diary? You know what I mean? So it's just strange that they would put these little details, but then overall it's not gonna really matter. But I mean, I get it. It's cute. It's like, oh, we're not gonna have a secret war. We're gonna remember this. But if anyone should have something to remember, it should be Ben Grimm because he had the most to lose by leaving the planet because he lost his humanity or he loses humanity again. So that kind of sucked. But I will say that this is by far the best Doctor Doom I've ever seen. Like clearly the best Doctor Doom.
Brian, the bar is so low, my friend.
I know that, but god damn, he was so good. Like I've never been a Doctor Doom guy, but the thing is like he's human, so I'm not that big into like him because of his power level. But the fact that he outsmarted the Beyonder or whatever, even though I think the Beyonder outsmarted him because he was playing him or something, but still, like that idea that he's gonna attack you like intellectually, and like that's how he gains his powers, and you know what I mean? Like I thought that was really well done, and I'm like, okay, now I kind of get this Doctor Doom that everyone kind of wants and sees in the comic, but we never got in the movies or whatever. So I get it. I think like I don't know, because the movie versions were so shitty. I guess it really does have to be that European accent to give it that extra, like that villainous kind of vibe that you get like in Die Hard. So something about European accents just make a villain even better.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting that Black Cat is brought without her consent, and really all of the characters are. But like the Black Cat situation feels particularly wrong because she has to save Blade and Morbius, and it's It's really funny to me. And yeah, so we at the end, Madam Web says that your greatest challenge awaits. So we will see what we have to look forward to in the final two episodes of this series. Like I said, it has been a very bumpy road here at the end. I've really enjoyed the fact that we've been able to go back and kind of reflect on this series and the things that have held up and the things that haven't. And like I was really digging these first four seasons. I was super into this, but this season's been rough. Like I'm not gonna lie, this season, these episodes, it hasn't been as much fun. So at this point, I'm really looking forward to next week. We will be talking about the final two episodes, and then we're gonna move on and do something else. And I'm very much looking forward to that because, like I said, I think we need to move on from this series because it's very clear that a lot of the people on staff seemingly are also shifting away and preparing for other things. So, any other thoughts on these 5 episodes that we discussed tonight?
Well, I mean, the Blade and Morbius stuff was interesting because, we thought we had closure with them, and they go back and, like, holy shit, they make a really good team. Like, why? Why? I don't know. I feel like the answers are there, and yet Marvel and especially Sony, goes off with this weird tangent with their characters and just ignores all these great storylines that are just right there. Like Blade and Morbius, of course they should be a team. That's like peanut butter and jelly, man. Like, hello, like, and the way that Morbius had his whole arc and now he's a good guy, like, it feels like that it was just like it was worth it, and that the turn was real, and that it was justified. You believe that he really is a good person now, trying to take down all the vampires in the world. So this connection between Blade and Morbius, and the fact that we still see Blade having these issues with his mother, and it's like, oh, that's still so heartbreaking. But I'm kind of glad they kind of went back to it. I don't know if we're gonna go back to it in the last 2 episodes, but like, man, I feel like there's this whole other show going on at the same time as Spider-Man, with Morbius and Blade chasing his mom around Europe, and I'm like, God damn, that would have been a great show. But I don't know. Now Morbius is off with Sony, and they can't even cross over anymore unless there's some really like financial, specific deal. But man, like this is clearly the direction they should go. Like, we know. I mean, this is not. I mean, as of this recording, the breaking news the last couple of days is that the director of Blade dropped out. Word on the street, the script is only 90 pages with 2 action sequences. I mean, that's rumor and hearsay, but I mean, if that's the case, they're really
It is a reflection of Marvel's problem in Phase 4. The writing has just not been there, and I don't know if it's because they're not hiring the right people, or if they're not hiring experienced screenwriters, or if they're spread too thin. But it is a reflection of Marvel's problems. The scripts are not good, and I think if I were to go through every Phase 4 project, I could probably say that the script is easily the weakest part. And not that Marvel scripts were ever great, but I could definitely say that what Marcus and McFeely were doing with those final 2 Avengers movies, with the Captain America sequels, like, they were doing some good stuff, but it just feels like Phase 4 has just been a real struggle. Like, the TV shows especially, like, that if you were to look at my rankings of the Marvel projects, like, so many of the bottom tier projects are the MCU Disney Plus series, like She-Hulk and Falcon and the Winter Soldier, What If. Like, these shows have just not been very good, and Moon Knight maybe even the worst of all, because that should have been a movie, had no business ever being a TV show. And it's funny because I contrast like those shows with a show like Andor, and it is very clear that an experienced screenwriter is behind Andor. Like, you could just feel the texture of that series so much more than the Marvel shows. Like, and Tony Gilroy is somebody who's written like the Bourne franchise. He was basically the person that saved Rogue One. I know his brother Dan Gilroy, who is also, directed Nightcrawler. I know he was also a part of the show. Like, the experience of screenwriting, it's so much more prevalent on Andor. And Andor's not perfect. Like, I think that the episodes don't really feel cohesive all the time, but there is a texture to that show that just does not exist in almost any of the other Disney Plus shows, whether it's Marvel, whether it's Star Wars, whether it's even like something like the Mighty Ducks. Like, I just feel like it's been a real problem. And yeah, I don't know. I have high hopes for Black Panther Wakanda Forever because Ryan Coogler is both the director and the screenwriter. And unlike Taika Waititi, he's not doing a million things. So I have some confidence. But after this, like I am very, very concerned about, where the MCU is going. And I'm sure that that's something that we can discuss on future podcasts. We are going to be doing a crossover with Ben and Matt at the end of the year. I'm sure this is going to come up again. So yeah, that's kind of where I come down. Weak screenplays across the board.
Yeah, it sucks because like that Blade movie has so much potential and I have so many ideas for it, but I'm not the one in charge, man. Because if it were me, I would put it in the '70s and tell the story with his mom and tell that tragic story and lead it to the modern times where he's still fighting with his mom because his mom is like the leader of a vampire cult clan, whatever. And I think that's a story that really, really is like something that a lot of people can latch on to. But alas, I don't know, because I mean they kind of did that with the first Blade movie, but they kind of went away from the mom a little bit. But if you make the mom the central character, where she's also the main vampire, I think that's like a lot of Shakespearean tragedy right there. You know what I mean? And you can totally sink your teeth into that. But that's just my opinion. And clearly seeing him and have that, the chemistry with Morbius, it's clear like they really need Morbius and Blade together. But it's not going to happen for a long time now, and maybe Secret Wars or something like that. But that's definitely the duo they need to put together for sure, in my opinion.
What if they call Stephen Norrington and they're like, Stephen, you haven't directed a movie in 20 years. Come save Blade.
You know what? You're not the only person who said that. You know what I mean? And I would love a person of color to come in and direct the movie as well, but I don't know if that's necessarily like the central. I mean, yeah, you're gonna have a lot of racial elements to it because if it's gonna be a black man, in like a New York setting going against a lot of racism, I get that, but I don't know. Maybe you don't necessarily need a person of color. Maybe you need someone like that that's got that comic book touch as opposed to a grounded real world kind of touch. You know what I mean? Because you kind of need both when it comes to Blade. Like you need the fantasy and you need the grounded realism. But it's not a bad idea to be honest. Or Guillermo del Toro just released Pinocchio. I don't know what he's got going on next, but the good Pinocchio, by the way, the good one. So I don't know. Like I would maybe even consider just dropping a shitload of money to Guillermo and be like, "Yo, let's do this." And
I can't imagine a scenario where Guillermo del Toro comes and directs one of these because he's got too many other things on his plate and he's doing actually interesting projects. And let's never talk about the Robert Zemeckis Pinocchio. What an abomination that movie is.
you told me not to watch it. I didn't want to watch it, so I'm never gonna watch it. I like the Jonathan Taylor Thomas one, to be honest, but that's kind of just me.
I mean, that's nostalgia. I mean, it's probably better than this one.
I mean, they really turned the kids into donkeys in that one. That creeped me out as a kid. So that's all I'm gonna say about it.
All right, so that is it for this week. Again, we are going to be discussing the final 2 episodes of the mid-90s Spider-Man and providing some overall thoughts on the series. So for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.
Yeah, Hydro Man, I'm afraid, might be like a serial rapist.